Good afternoon, and welcome to our following panel session on spatial planning for climate-neutral territories in Europe. It's a pleasure to be here with such a knowledgeable panel of experts working at the intersection of spatial development, environmental policy, and climate action. As Europe moves towards ambitious climate goals, net zero emissions, a just transition, and resilient territories, spatial planning is gaining renewed importance. Planning is no longer just about zoning or infrastructure. It has become a critical tool to script systemic cross-sectoral responses to climate change. Whether it's limiting land take, managing energy transitions, or balancing competing uses of sea space, how we organize our territories today will define our sustainability tomorrow. This panel brings together insights from 3 recent expert-supported research projects, each focusing on a different but interconnected challenge in the spatial planning landscape. First, we will explore the concept of no net land take, which aims to halt the expansion of artificial land surfaces by 2050. This project benchmarks planning strategies and governance mechanisms across European countries, examining how they define, monitor, and address land take while navigating trade-offs between development and environmental preservation as key priorities in the European policy landscape. Next, we'll shift to green industrialization, a crucial pillar in the EU's green transition. This work investigates how territories can support industrial decarbonization through spatial planning, rethinking land use, energy systems, and circular economy logistics. Beyond infrastructure, it asks us to be bold and imaginative. What kind of spatial visions do we need to enable a truly sustainable industrial future? And finally, we'll turn to territorial cooperation for blue renewable energy, a project addressing the expansion of offshore renewable energy and the vital role of maritime spatial planning. With increasing pressure on our seas, this research looks at sea use conflicts, planning innovation, and the need for cross-border cooperation to streamline deployment while protecting marine ecosystems. Together, these 3 projects offer a multi-scalar, multi-sectoral view on how spatial planning can help deliver on Europe's climate neutrality goals, on land, at sea, and in the industry. This will be a dynamic conversation designed to engage not only those in the room, but also you. So we are once again kindly inviting you to use Slido, propose questions already, and upload the ones you find the most relevant. We'll make sure to use them. We are joined today by a panel of experts who contributed to these projects and will share key findings, practical insights, and reflections on what this means for policy and planning practice. First, we have Professor Tim Devos. Tim Devos is an engineer, architect with a master's in human settlements and a PhD in social geography, focusing on participation and co-production in urban planning. He is the co-founder of Endeavour, a cooperative for urban transition, and a professor of spatial planning at Ghent University. His research explores socio-spatial issues, citizen engagement, and the evolving role of planners and urban designers in a complex urban environment. Next to him, Dr. Nora Sánchez-Gassen is a senior research fellow at Norregio, specializing in research related to the 2030 Agenda and the green transition. Since 2018, she has focused on supporting the Sustainable Development Goals implementation at the local and regional levels in the Nordic countries. Nora leads large-scale projects on the green transition's regional impacts and has developed a Nordic toolbox for a just green transition to ensure inclusive and sustainable progress towards climate neutrality. And then we have Frank Holstein again. Frank, manager in Deloitte's consulting services, focuses on EU policy, including evaluations and studies for ESPON, the European Commission, and Eurostat. With 10 years of experience in policy research, Frank specializes in EU cohesion policy, territorial development, and multi-level governance. He holds a master's in European spatial planning from Radboud University and has contributed to projects such as COBREN, focusing on marine spatial planning and territorial cooperation in Europe. Tim, let's start with your question. The EU soil strategy requests member states to define objectives to reduce net land take by 2030 at national, regional, and local levels. You have explored in this study how different countries not only define but also monitor no-net land take in different ways. Can you tell us about it?
Yes. First off, thanks for the invitation. It's very nice to share some insights from this interesting study. And as you said, it all started with this EU soil strategy to aim for healthy soils by 2050, and no-net land take is a very important aspect of that. And there's no better way to kind of demonstrate that through this first image, showing how we have seen a very big percentage of land still being taken up by artificialization. Between 2000 and 2018 is the image you see here, where over 30% increase in artificial land cover has been going on. So making it super urgent to understand why no-net land take is such an important aspect of trying to achieve healthy soils, but also broader sustainability goals. So in this project, we try to take this as a starting point and look at how different countries throughout Europe have been taking this agenda up in a diversity of ways. And then it became very clear, very evident, that there's a whole lot of ways of defining, monitoring, implementing no-net land take strategies across Europe. And that's actually what we've been looking at. And so it's very interesting to see how there's a wide variety of both definitions and monitoring frameworks in place. There's, to start off, no single definition or method for tracking no-net land take, because different countries are doing it in different ways. Some countries have set very clear quantitative national targets, while in other countries there is still no target set in a quantitative way up to this point. And to make things even more complicated, for some there's no legal ceiling, for others there are some legal ceilings, for others it's very much open to interpretation, and also in some countries it's left to regions, or particular regions, to implement these national strategies. And what we try to do is try to find like a sort of overview of what is going on with this definition. And I brought some examples. For example, in Germany, a national goal has been set of trying to achieve less than 30 hectares a day land take by 2030. But this is definitely not uniformly applied. There you see the challenges. For example, not all federal states are implementing these targets. While, for example, in Luxembourg, very different context, of course, much smaller country, but we see that there's an aim for 0.25 hectares a day by 2035, which has been made part of a national master plan. So a very different way of implementing and anchoring this strategy. But other countries like Poland or Czechia, they have no kind of fixed quantitative targets just yet. So there's a large discrepancy of what's going on throughout Europe. In addition, the way it's monitored, it's very different. For example, there's the classical way of monitoring it based on fiscal declarations, but that's very complicated because sometimes things such as road infrastructure or private gardens are not taken into account. Well, this is definitely a form of soil sealing to some extent. And different countries are developing new ways to deal with it. For example, in France, there are methodologies, GIS-based, being developed to try to monitor soil sealing in different ways, but also including gardens and parking areas in this analysis, and how do we do so. And other countries or other regions like Flanders, for example, there's a much more, let's say, photo interpretation-based reasoning where they're defining 10 by 10 squares and trying to look at how is, based on this almost grids across the territory, how do we see soil take kind of changing. So that was very interesting to see and observe these differences. But at the same time, we see that it's very hard to implement these no-net land take goals because it really shakes to the core some, the legacy of certain planning systems. While old zoning plans, which are often still at play, they have allocated certain greenfield land for growth development, for extra housing developments, and it's very difficult to overturn this because this is very tied into legal issues. It's very politically very challenging to put this on the table and overthrow these planning systems. And at the same time, we also see that local tax systems still reward to some extent, or at least not penalize greenfield developments, making these things very complicated in essence. And then there's a lot of different other challenges, like the idea that no-net land take will require multi-level governance across municipal boundaries, even across regional boundaries. And a lot of regions are not ready for this when it comes to spatial planning systems and regulation. That's to point out some of these very much, very vital thresholds to be overcome. But at the same time, we saw that going into discussion with people from different countries, experts, we saw that there's also a very big potential in this non-net land take goal, because there is a need, or there is a sort of hunger for a common discourse on what non-net land take can mean and what it could mean across Europe. And really tapping into this is a very important issue. At the same time, it is a very strong concept to bridge ecological and planning goals, because it really bridges issues of zoning, land use, but also soil quality and biodiversity. And in that sense, it's a very interesting lever that could be used to that extent. At the same time, a quantitative goal is important, and we see this influences the local discourse very much, but at the same time we feel, or we have discovered, that it should not be seen as an isolated objective, because then it can be easily put under scrutiny in comparison to other targets, such as the necessity for more housing and so on and so forth. So you need to really try to tackle these challenges. And I think that's some of the main things which came out of this study, which we can expand on.
Many questions come to mind, but I would underline what you said about, or I feel from your words there's a kind of friction between the usual planning practices at the local level and the objectives that non-net land take wants to achieve globally, or not globally, but at a wider scheme. How can planners and policymakers balance these frictions, these short-term development pressures with long-term goals of sustainability? How can we address different scales, local versus regional versus national, in this approach?
Well, I think indeed, it's something that really challenges to the core deep-rooted planning systems, but I think it's also an opportunity to really challenge these and to really take on board these ideas of rezoning, to kind of confront legal obstacles that we are seeing, confront issues of ownership, land ownership, which we are not really able to confront at this moment. But at the same time, we should prioritize issues such as urban regeneration, brownfield redevelopment, multifunctional land use, instead of actively promoting, or at least facilitating, ongoing greenfield development. Yeah. And this is very much intertwined with, let's say, tax systems, with a growth-oriented development agenda in some places. And basically, some of the legal systems and the planning frameworks in place are still part of this really, in a sense, outdated system. But I think there's a lot of good examples going on in both rural and urban areas of fiscal tools that are being put into place or experimented with, zoning updates that are happening. So all these examples are occurring throughout Europe. And also, if you look at the way some countries have been translating these objectives into very concrete quantitative goals, this has an effect. There's a delay to it, but it's ongoing.
Definitely, there's still a lot of work to do. Nora, let's move to green industrialization. What are its benefits? What are the benefits of green industrialization for European regions, and what are the challenges of green industrialization at regional level?
Yes, thank you, Francisco. My name is Nora Sanchez-Cassen, and I work as a senior research fellow at Nordregio, and I'm contributing here to our session with the title Spatial Planning Towards Climate Neutrality, the Levers and Obstacles, and of course one area that is quite important in Europe to achieve climate goals, that's green industrialization. We need to look at our industries, and when we talk about green industrialization, essentially we're talking about two different processes. On the one hand, greening our existing industries, so to say. We have to move away from the use of fossil fuels. We have to lower emissions, embrace circular economy, become more resource efficient, all of these things. So the existing industries that we have, they demand our attention. But of course, the green industrialization, the processes that we're in, they also hold a lot of opportunities and potential for new green industries. If you simply think about green energy provision, for example. If you think about the circular economy, there's a lot of opportunities for new businesses and new investments in this area as well. And we at Nordregio, together with ESPON, have written a working paper on this topic that you can see here on the screen, that was done on behalf of the Swedish presidency of the Council of the EU, because green industrialization was a key topic for the Swedish presidency, we can say. And in this paper, we've tried to identify a bit the opportunities, but also the obstacles of green industrialization for regions and municipalities in Europe. Because of course, green industrialization doesn't happen sort of in no space. It happens in a context. It happens in our municipalities. It happens in our regions. There's very different developments going on depending on the context that we have and the conditions that we have on the ground. So in this publication, we've tried to identify some of the opportunities. We've tried to identify and discuss some of the challenges and dig a bit deeper into this topic, what green industrialization means for regions and municipalities. And you can say that, of course, there are a lot of opportunities involved here, especially if you think about remote areas, rural areas, perhaps those areas that have experienced stagnation or decline. If green industrialization takes place, especially if there come new investments, new business opportunities, that may be very good for some regions, for some municipalities. It may lead to the creation of new economic opportunities, perhaps new jobs. This may benefit people who live in those areas, in an ideal sense at least. It may be one of the solutions that can contribute to reduce out-migration, for example. You may even manage to attract some newcomers to certain regions if there's new economic opportunities that arise. And all of this has repercussions, of course, if you think about these demographic trends and implications. Think about public service, for example. If there's this new energy, some new investments, some new developments going on, it may mean that it's easier, for example, to uphold public services. So there's a lot of ripple effects that municipalities and regions can think of. But there's, of course, also challenges that may come with green industrialization. One of the key challenges I think that we can think of naturally is land use conflicts, because green industrialization can take space, needs space. And this relates also to the no net land take presentation that we just heard before. If there's green industrialization, especially if there's new investments, especially if there's new activities, green energy, for example, but also resource extraction, if there's a new industrial park, all of this takes land, and land is often already used for someone, by someone with different purposes. So almost naturally, green industrialization can lead to conflicts there that regions and municipalities have to handle. You can also think about other aspects. For example, if there's new jobs being created, if there's new economic activity, we need skills, we need people, we need the right kind of competences, and how to make sure that these are there, how to make sure that there is not an obstacle to development simply because we don't have the manpower or the human capital is something to think about. Very easily, especially in smaller municipalities with sort of lower capacity, lower finances, you easily talk also about challenges that relate to planning and to financing. You may imagine that if there's big green investments going on, there's a lot of things to plan for that go beyond the actual investment itself. Very often you need infrastructure, you need housing, you may need new services, you may need a lot of things that need to be financed and that they need to be planned for, which can be very challenging, especially for smaller municipalities. So there easily we get into discussions as well. Who's actually responsible here? Who finances? Who takes the risks? And we see also in practice quite some challenges with these kind of questions. So how do we move beyond that, you can say? How do we deal with those kind of challenges and make sure that municipalities and regions sort of can reap the benefit of green industrialization and sort of trying to handle the challenges? Well, again, I can point to the paper that I showed there on the first slide, where we really tried to discuss some of these opportunities, some of the strategies in depth. But some things that can, of course, be mentioned is quite simply the need for place-based solutions, place-based development. We have very different contexts in Europe. We have very different conditions, opportunities, challenges. These need to be taken into account. So it has to be really place-based strategies that really try to make sure that regions, municipalities can make the best out of these opportunities. Working horizontally and vertically with actors that are relevant is very important, that we work across levels of governance, that we involve stakeholders, especially those from the regions, the entrepreneurs, civil society, also the population, bring in a different kind of stakeholders to make sure that the best solutions are developed for that particular context. Reskilling, upskilling, very important. We need to make sure that we have the courses, the opportunities available for workers and employees to develop the skills that are actually needed in the green industries. So here, again, a close cooperation, for example, between employers, labor unions, educational sector is required. And then if you have very big investments, of course, then we may have to talk about really bringing in more people. In the north of Sweden, we've seen some of those examples. There's a lot of challenges that come with that. And then you have to really think holistically, not just about the industries, not just about the jobs. You have to start thinking about the housing that might be needed, the services that might be needed, the quality of life, how to integrate newcomers and those that are already living there, and all these kind of things. If you think that is an interesting topic, I can also point you to the two publications here on the screen. At Nordregio, we recently published a report here on the regional impacts of the green transition. So we really try to look a bit more specifically for some industries, what are the regional effects and how to deal with them. And we have also published a Nordic toolbox for a just green transition recently, where we've tried to collect evidence, information, real-life examples, best practices and tools for policymakers on how to make sure that these green transition processes are more just and more fair and really take local context into account. So that could also be relevant. It is directed more towards policymakers in the Nordics, but I think all the content we have really applies in the rest of Europe as well. So this might be relevant for policymakers beyond the Nordics, I would say.
Yeah, I would like to question industrialization processes and projects, and also green industrialization can spark some kind of resistance between local populations, and there are some concerns. You have mentioned just the land take that these projects have. How can we address these concerns and conflicts caused by green industrialization projects?
This is something we've looked at in different projects and in different contexts. And I think one thing that keeps coming back is the importance to really engage local populations, local stakeholders early on in a constructive way, listening to what people have to say. We see too many examples also in the Nordics where big investments are supposed to take place. To think about a wind park, or new solar panels. But local populations hear about these things through the media. They have not received any communication of that before, and they may also have had no participation opportunities at all. And almost by definition, that can spark resistance. So I think one way to really go about is to communicate about any plans with the local population and local stakeholders early and openly, and offering room for them to bring in concerns, but also solutions and strategies and ideas that they have. Because one thing that we see also in our research is quite remarkably, I think we know that large majorities in Europe are really concerned about climate change. And when we ask people in the Nordic countries, half of them also say that they are willing, or they think we should have sort of more ambitious climate policies. We should be more ambitious in the green transition, even if it means that we have to increase taxes. So in a sense, you see there is a willingness even for some sort of personal sacrifice. This is something we can build on, but too often you do these green transition projects and they're sort of decided and planned and implemented on top of people's head, and that can create resistance simply because people don't like the process. So I think there is one opportunity to sort of come in and do better. You may not make everyone happy anyway, but at least you can catch some more people and also potentially come up with better solutions, better policies, better local plans, because you build on local knowledge. So this is a sort of, I think, a low-hanging fruit.
So communicate, engage, and listen early on in the process.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Nora. Let's turn quite literally to you, Frank. Well, you work in a fascinating subject, marine and spatial planning. Which synergies exist between offshore renewable energy and other uses? We are talking about competing for land, for uses of the land. How could the co-use of offshore wind parks and other offshore renewable energy devices can be promoted with different uses of the marine environment? Yes.
Thank you, Francesco, for the question. I'm afraid that at the sea it's no different than on land, as what we just discussed. On sea there are also many different functions that are out there, and if we want to advance in the energy transition, if we want to achieve the European objectives that are there for offshore renewable energy, which are for 2030 to move from today about 37 gigawatts to 2030 to move to more than 100 gigawatts of offshore renewable energy. And when we go to 2050, we talk about more than 300 gigawatts of offshore renewable energy. So there is a lot more offshore renewable energy, which requires also a lot more space. Yeah. And of course, there is other sea uses as well. So we have the different kind of the classic parts like fisheries or shipping, nature conservation. So all this kind of sea uses, they demand the space, and if we want to increase one of them, that creates some parts. So if you look at the map that we have on screen there as well, the European seas are not that empty as it might look like when we are standing on the beach. So there is a huge part to do, And actually, if we want to tap into the potential that we have out in the sea, we will need to seek those kind of synergies. And that would require, that we need to seek how can we combine offshore renewable energy with those other sea functions that we have. And in theory, we can seek those synergies with all of the different sea functions, except for shipping. Shipping by international law, we cannot combine any kind of offshore renewable energy in shipping lanes. And if we zoom in maybe on one part of the part, because this map shows very much European seas as full, but if we look into the Baltic Sea, we might see a few more differences that are out there. So there we also see on the next slide the along the coast from Finland, for example, you see all the white lines in the orange part, which are the shipping lanes. So here we cannot do offshore renewable energy. But all the other colorful parts, there is potential for offshore renewable energy. So that can be wind parks, that can be solar fields, it can be tidal energy or wave energy. You also see a lot of striped areas on the map as well. And these are kind of the other sea functions. So I mapped here some of the parts which are more, speaking to the eye. So which is aquaculture, nature protected area, as well as military zones. So in theory, we can have synergies, we can combine offshore renewable energy with each of these kind of functions. We can have a wind farm and make sure, okay, there is no other kind of activities around there, so nature can evolve in those areas. So in theory, that all works. What you also see on the map, and if we zoom in on the nature conservation areas, these are the ones in green highlighted. There's different shades of green in this map. So we have the light green around Sweden and Poland, for example, where overall at national policies it said, okay, here we support this kind of synergies. We can do this kind of combination of nature conservation with offshore renewable energy. Whereas we have other kind of countries where maritime spatial planning does not allow this. So also at sea, maritime spatial planning, it's about this zoning, mapping this kind of different functions and putting that all together. So that works exactly the same way as on land. And we need to really, if we want to unlock this potential of offshore renewable energy and meet those European targets, we need to combine those functions at sea.
Okay. It is very interesting how, again, we are competing for the same space for different uses. I understand that you are proposing, or maritime and spatial planning is also proposing to combine uses, and this might create friction, for example, with fisheries, which is a more traditional use of of sea space. How we can reconcile these different interests? Are there any good practices also on how to bring these different interests together?
So from the Cobram project, we saw a few examples of doing that. A lot is what Nora also highlighted, is about stakeholder engagement, making sure within the different practices you create this kind of social acceptance. So early on talking with the different communities, and okay, if we want to develop offshore renewable energy, did you engage in that kind of part? We also have seen practices. One of the case studies, what we have seen in Denmark, where during the construction phase of a wind farm in this case, and what we call a bottom fixer, these are the wind turbines which are really touched upon the seabed. During the construction phase, they give compensation to the fishermen for the disturbances during that part. At the same time, it's also what we see in our case studies, a lot of showcasing the benefits of it. So when you go in dialogue with the different stakeholders, and in this case, the fishing communities, showing the added value or the contribution, what offshore renewable energy can also bring, because this might be areas which are where there's less shipping, where maybe afterwards, after construction phase, where there may be more fish coming around because maybe more nature or sea plants are developing there, and maybe it's actually more fish are going there. So for the fishermen, it can be beneficial as well. And this kind of the stories, and there may be more added values that need to be told to make sure you get everybody on board.
Yeah. So one commonality we can see here is, again, conflicting interests of use of space, be it sea or land. What is the role, this is a question for the three of you, what is the role of cross-national or transnational cooperation in this? Is there any European framework that we can use to reconcile these conflicting interests and to kind of, organize the different priorities and the different interests that drive green industrialization, the use of land, the use of the maritime space? Who wants to react to this?
I think in general, sharing experiences across countries is super valuable. And often this discussion gets sort of bogged down in differences, or saying, okay, but the legal frameworks or the planning frameworks are definitely different. But in essence, this sometimes kind of blocks the actual exchange, because there's something to learn from these different experiences. And in my feeling, it often gets limited too much by this idea of it all being different in terms of housing cultures, planning cultures, or even the suburban dream, which might be more present in another country than. But in essence, that doesn't mean you cannot exchange on certain wins or even on certain experiences in depth, not on a general level. And I think there's a lot of work to be done there.
I can also absolutely support that thought, that even I recognize this, the stressing of differences and why a case cannot be transferred, but often it's not about transferring a specific case one by one. It's just taking inspiration and seeing is there some element that might work for us. One thing we can also add, maybe it's not so much about conflict resolution or the alignment of interests, but very often I think cross-country collaboration or cross-regional collaboration can open new paths for solutions. I've talked a little bit about some of the challenges that come with green industrialization, all of the things that need to happen, sometimes in small municipalities with limited capacity. But if you work across municipalities, across regions, perhaps even with regions on the other side of the border, sometimes solutions can be found. Think about transport, access to education, access to healthcare. We see some examples of this in the Nordic countries, that in some of these areas that struggle with this, if you start to work together, even across national borders, sometimes there can be solutions that are found that make it easier for everyone. So I think we should not just only think about borders as something that divides us, but see, can we move across those to develop these solutions that make it easier for everyone? So I think there's a lot of potential there in different contexts.
No, I can share that as well, and that's also moving beyond the sharing of experience, but it's also very relevant, and we see examples of that across Europe as well. In the project we look a lot into national maritime spatial planning plans, with for the countries delineation and the seabed maps the different functions, what are out there, what are the synergies, what are the barriers, what are the stakeholders that need to be done, but moving that broader, doing this kind of elements at the sea basin level. So within in particular the North Sea and the Baltic Sea, they're quite active in that, but as well as in the Atlantic Sea and the other seabeds, we also see people are active in that, and that solves part of the differences that we have in terms of where is a certain sea function a barrier, or where can it function as a synergy to advance offshore renewable energy. So moving beyond those kind of national borders and discussing this at a wider range definitely supports.
Yeah, and possibly making it a hot topic in different countries, because we need to talk more about these issues. You mentioned taking inspiration from the work that you have conducted. Can you share some good practice, some successful case, or any inspiration or a story that can trigger action elsewhere in Europe? And then the second part of the question would be how we can promote public debate on these subjects, how through examples, through new regulations, how we can put these ideas or put these subjects in the minds of the collective people?
I mentioned the Nordic toolbox that we have created for policymakers and how to make the green transition, these processes, a bit more just and fair, think about the impacts, etc. And there we've tried to collect quite a range of different real-life examples on what has been done. There's quite a few examples, for example, on how you can engage people, both in national level elections, but also at the very local level. There are some examples. Denmark is one that comes to mind, where those who are behind a big new green investment, a big new green industrial area, have really engaged the population early on, where the population could also come in as shareholders, benefit from the processes that are taking place there, where there was a very close collaboration with different stakeholders, from civil society to school to local entrepreneurs. So there are definitely examples to learn from, and we have tried to pinpoint some of those in this toolbox that I mentioned. So this is a place to go to find some of those examples. We have some more in-depth descriptions of those as well, done by colleagues at NordRegio who know all the details about this.
Tim, for Netherlands take.
Yeah, I think a reflection to share on this, like whether it being on the public agenda or in the political sphere or being discussed in a broad sense, it's a very interesting thing that you feel that because it's such a technical description, it's very absent in the public debate in a sense, with some exceptions. For example, if we look at France, there's been discussions on to which extent does this non-Atlantic agenda conflict with the development potential of certain rural areas, and this whole idea of dualities between built-up, densified versus being a rural region, and this contradiction has sparked some discussion there. Or in Flanders, where you saw that the discussion on the building shift, where non-Atlantic would start like picking into like property rights and so on, got very heated. But in a general sense, we saw that there was very little engagement with the concept, and that there you feel that while it's such a strong thing to build upon, the reason that it's so absent in the public debate is because it's not connected that much to other ongoing issues, to other things such as housing, access to natural resources, and so on and so forth. So this whole idea of do not fall in the trap of defining only technical-oriented goals, but really build it up in a sort of discursive way connected to storytelling approaches to really connect to ongoing shifts, which needs to happen also on a personal level, is something which I found fascinating.
If I can just add to that, that resonates with some of the research we've been doing, where we see more and more a demand, not just for doing the policies, but to build visions and stories, like you say. So a demand to create a vision, not just set a quantitative goal that shall be achieved, but also to describe, okay, how will the future look like? For example, if we manage to limit land take, or if we have these green industries in our area, how will the future look like then? What does it mean for us who live here? What are some of the challenges, and being honest about that, but also really point to what are some of the improvements we're trying to achieve? What is the goal we are all working towards? Because then it becomes much easier to also align different stakeholders to move towards that goal, and to have conversations also about what do we want. So I think this, what you said about the importance of visions and storytelling, I think we see that a lot as well.
This is a fascinating, a very interesting aspect, and I think it relates to the three projects or subjects, the conflict or the tension between local visions and local necessities and common European vision or common European goals. How do this conflict? How do they can be reconciled? And what citizens can perceive as positive for them who live in a specific place, as opposed as wide and often diffuse European goals. Do you feel like in your work, do you sense this kind of conflict between the positions of local communities in be it green industrialization projects or the different uses for their marine space? I don't know. How can we manage this kind of conflict?
I mean, we have seen it a lot, a slightly different topic, but we've seen it a lot in relation to the Agenda 2030 when that came in the Nordics, but I imagine it's similar in the rest of Europe. You have these global goals, which all sound very good, and I think a lot of people can get behind it. but what do these goals mean concretely for us in the place where we live, in our communities? And we've seen in the Nordics that a lot of work has been put into localizing these goals. And I think the same goes for a lot of the European climate goals, for example, a lot of the goals we have there. They sound nice, and I think a lot of people can get behind them, but they can also be very abstract, and trying to break it down to the regional, local context and see how can we here contribute, and what does this mean for us, and what do we want, how do we want to contribute, and what do we want to achieve. I think this is a very important task, but there's also a lot of work that has been done, so a lot of experiences to learn from on how to do this and how to have these conversations and this kind of planning. So I think especially from the Agenda 2030 experience, a lot also to take on for other policy contexts.
And one last question maybe for all of you about the governance mechanisms that we have in place to develop these policies and the ones that we need to design for the future. What are the limitations of the current governance mechanisms and what governance mechanisms we have to put in place for the future to implement non-net land take, reindustrialization, the correct use of sea space?
So in terms of marine spatial planning, it's a lot about coordination between different sectoral ministries. So I think that is the governance part, what comes in mind immediately between. It's not only the ministries who are responsible overall for offshore renewable energy, but also the different kind of parts that need to coordinate. So this kind of coordination and dialogues need to happen. And what is for me important in that is to do that on a basis of evidence as well. So within the tools and frameworks from the Maritime Spatial Planning Directive or from the MSP Global, so UN guidelines for maritime spatial planning, impact assessments are also a key tool. So these are kind of parts that provide the evidence how, if we put offshore renewable energy in a place, how does that create, what are the implications for the other functions. So this could be a tool to actually engage and encourage this kind of cross-sectoral discussions.
Okay, any reaction from you?
I think, in general, working across different levels of governance is, of course, always important, but always also a challenge. But one thing that I wanted to add, I think, is important, even if we work in a municipality or a region, working across sectors and silos seems to be very important. We see that often a lot of more ambitious visions and policies and projects can be achieved if we stop working and thinking in these silos, where often in different, let's say, departments or parts of a local administration, if we work across them, if people are actually aware what goes on in my municipality, in my local authority, what are the different things we're trying to achieve in transport, in agriculture, in all of the different areas, and how can we work together, and how does it all fit together to a broader vision for our municipality or regions. I think if we manage to break across these silos and coordinate better there, you can see in those examples where efforts are made and where it's being done, often it's easier to achieve these larger goals.
Okay. Thank you very much, Nora. I think it is about time for us to wrap up. So I want to thank you to all of our speakers today, and to you, our audience, for all of your questions and your interaction. Before we close, I strongly encourage you once more to stay connected to the ESPON webpage, where you can learn more about these recently concluded projects. And I, once again, urge you to follow their updates, to stay informed, to stay engaged with these and other ESPON activities on climate neutral territories. Thank you for being here with us tonight, and goodbye.